Last week we read the story of Jesus at the Last Supper with his disciples. Following the meal, Jesus is arrested. Today we read from John chapter 18, verses 12 through 27. So the soldiers, their officer, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and bound him. First they took him to Annas, who's the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who advised Jews that it was better to have one person die for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter was standing outside the gate. So another disciple who was known to the high priest went out, spoke to the woman who guarded the gate, and brought Peter in. The woman said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the police had made a fire because it was cold, and they were standing around it warming themselves. Peter was also standing with them and warming himself. Then the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogues and in the temple, where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard what I have said to them. They know what I said." When he had said this, one of the police nearby struck Jesus across the face, saying, "Is this how you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They asked him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Again, Peter denied it, and at that moment the cock crowed. The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Grace to you and peace. Amen. In 2007, the usual labor pool of adventure-seeking college kids that I was used to relying on for my restaurant, well, that pool seemed to have dried up. I decided to go deeper with an employment and cultural exchange program working through an agency contracting with the U.S. State Department. The agency would match us with young people from a variety of different countries. And they had to be actively enrolled in college at the time, but they could come and live and work in the U.S. for a season. Just as June arrived and the summer tourists along with it, we started welcoming new staff members. They came mostly from Eastern Europe, countries like Slovakia, Belarus, Bulgaria, and Russia. Nina and Paul were from Poland. They were a couple. Nina's English was better than Paul's, but neither of them had strong enough English to work with customers, taking orders and serving, so we put them to work in the kitchen. Even though neither of them had worked in a kitchen before, they learned quickly. And they certainly worked hard. Well, Nina worked hard. Paul just tried to keep up. He kept us all entertained, though, with his goofiness and rough English translations of his random observations about the world. They had a great summer, as did all the internationals, as we called them. And it was hard to say goodbye in September, but just as the tourists were leaving, the internationals headed back home and to school, too. As the next summer approached, we received an email from Nina and Paul expressing an interest in returning for another season. And it was an easy decision, and so great to have them back again. Over the course of 3 years or so, we had over 20 different international students come work for us. It required a lot of extra effort and expense, but the relationships that formed offered an intangible reward that more than made up for all the difference. This was just as Facebook was really taking off, and as a result, we were able to easily stay in touch over the coming years with many of the internationals that worked for us. We celebrated virtually when Nina and Paul were married, and they now share a wedding anniversary with Anne and I. Paul went to graduate school and is now a psychologist working with trauma victims in hospitals. And Nina became a mother, and they now have 3 beautiful children, Ora, Hannah, and Jan. Perhaps it's because of connections like these, but the news coming out of Eastern Europe this week continues to dominate my consciousness. Watching a war unfold in my newsfeed it's taking its toll on me. I've been experiencing an anxiousness that is rather unfamiliar and certainly unsettling. Encountering the stories of missile strikes on a maternity hospital, the targeting of civilians taking shelter in a theater, or families just fleeing to get out of harm's way. Well, it's all contributing to a darkening world view. Perhaps it's fitting that we're in the midst of this Lenten season, and the theological work that a pastor like me is supposed to be leading is well situated for this kind of darkness. John, our gospel companion, is certainly taking full advantage of the darkness of night to add drama to our narrative. As if a world at war isn't enough dramatic darkness for us, we must also contend with Jesus' descent from life into death. I don't know about you, but I'm not sure how much further into the darkness I can travel right now. Yet, here we are, trying our best to follow Jesus, like Peter, trying to keep him close, trying to find just enough light to recognize a pathway forward. Maybe if we come stand by the fire, we'll see just enough to know where this is all headed. But coming out of the shadows also carries a price, doesn't it? How do you step into the light without exposing too much of yourself? It's hard to know where the line for bravery stops and foolhardiness begins. What value is there in charging beyond that line? In these dimly lit moments that seem so uncertain and fraught, there are indicators that we seek to help us navigate through, like the reflective signs on the highway at night, or the nightlight stuck into the outlet at the top of the stairs. Our eyes and our attention are drawn to them. By themselves, they may seem insignificant, but in the darkness, they have the capacity to save us from the unknown. As it borders Ukraine, Poland has been receiving a significant majority of the refugees escaping the terrors of this unfolding war. Just as this started happening, our friend Nina shared on Facebook that they were preparing to share their home with a Ukrainian family that needed a safe place to stay. Through a network of volunteers, they welcomed Yulia and her sons into their home shortly afterwards. Last Sunday, we had the chance to video chat with Nina and Paul. We haven't spoken in person since that last summer of 2008. We got to meet their beautiful children and hear them describe what they're experiencing through all of this. Expecting that she would remain in Poland indefinitely, Yulia has already found an apartment, and she and her children are getting settled there. Now, Nina and Paul are working to secure permanent housing for other refugees that continue to stream into Poland. They recognize that this is not going to be a short-term or a temporary challenge. They also spoke of their own fears, of how unstable and uncertain the future seems right now. Given his professional background, Paul is also imagining a dramatic escalation of the consequences of the trauma to which so many Ukrainians have been subjected. So they remain focused on helping, even if it's just one family at a time. Nina and Paul's response to the darkness of a senseless war has been to step forward into the uncertainty, but trusting that starting somewhere is still better than not starting at all. Nina and Paul are creating a light for us and others to follow. In our story, Peter is struggling in the darkness too. Earlier in the garden, and by the light of lamps and torches, he was willing to risk it all, swinging a sword. Coming to God's defense and risking it all seems like a valiant move, doesn't it? But that wasn't a realistic response to the overwhelming odds of destruction. And even though Jesus invokes the name of God 3 times, John puts the great I am into Jesus' mouth. This isn't a fight that needs winning. Those same odds remain even in the courtyard now. And now, by the light of a campfire, Peter comes to realize something important, emphasized in his threefold denial of what, on the surface, we know to be true. In contrast to Jesus' declaration of I am, Peter responds in the opposite. I am not. If you at all identify with Peter in the face of darkness, remember, Jesus is God, and that you are not. What might be possible is if you take that burden off yourself then. Remember, God is God. And the world belongs to God. God's world is in darkness, yes. But the light of the world has come. The good news is that it's not our responsibility to be the light. Maybe it can be enough just to be a place that points, or even just a little, reflects that light. You are not God. In the very moment that Peter realizes this truth, the rooster signals the end of the night. The morning is coming, and with it, the light. This darkness will give way So look for the places that God's light is reflecting. If possible, be one of those places. Today, I give thanks for Nina and Paul being one of those places. Thanks be to God. Amen.